Diana learned her religion the same way she learned how to do floral design. She never took a formal class in floral design. She never even took an art class about primary colors and what looks good with another color. You see, her family owned a florist shop. And in her earliest days, she would kind of go there and just play. And as she got a little older, she was given a little more responsibility in the family business. She would sweep up at the end of the day, but always watching what her father did. She's a brilliant writer, and she describes her experience with her father in this way. He would pick up each stem as if he were picking up a paintbrush. Eye the color and the placement carefully. And flower by flower, make the most beautiful things. Then she said, when I was about 7, he asked, would you like to try? I felt nervous, knowing I could never arrange anything as well as he could. But he directed my hands, teaching me about space and shape and size. And I learned. She grew up Methodist as well, going with her family to church regularly, to the sanctuary on Sunday mornings for worship, where she would learn to listen to sermons and sing the hymns and pray together. She would go to meetings where the congregation organized to be about its benevolent work, feeding programs that hungry people might have food, the gathering up of clothing in order that they might be shared with those in need. Diana learned her religion the way she learned to be a florist, by watching and imitating and being involved. Well, she grew up to be a very sincere follower of Jesus Christ. And so when she says that she grew up with a faith in Jesus Christ, it's convincing. But she says something else about this faith that she inherited. She said, I learned the what of faith very well. But we never spoke much about the why. I learned the what, but not the why. And what she means by that is that she learned the actions, the disciplines, and the outward expressions of religious life through being present in a religious community. But not much attention was spent on the why, the internal meaning of all that they did together. In fact, she would say that sometimes her parents got a little anxious when she would ask, why? What does this mean? I suppose if she ever asked her parents, well, why do we arrange flowers? They probably would have given a very simple answer like, well, people buy them. But the why was something that was uncomfortable in her family circle. And I suspect at times it's something that's just a little uncomfortable for us. The what is easy. The why is challenging. The what was relatively easy for Job. He's got the what down pat. He's got the what down pat. There once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And here comes the what. He's got it down pat. That man was blameless. He was upright. One who feared God and who turned away from evil. Job's got the what down pat. I wonder if Job learned his religious life the way Diana learned it, in that intimate family circle. But something happens. Something happens, and the what just isn't enough anymore. There's this great conversation up in heaven, and Job has got the what down so pat that even God brags on him. And when God brags on him, another member of the heavenly court, the Satan, hears what God has to say and says, well, of course. And then there's this little game between God and Satan that would make for a very interesting sermon that I'll preach some other time. But for the purposes of this morning, something happens in the midst of Job's life. He experiences loss. He experiences pain. He has things that just don't add up to all the what he grew up with. And he's left wondering. I believe that the book of Job becomes important in our religious tradition around 586 BCE, after the people of the Israelites are conquered by the Babylonians and they're carried off into exile. They begin an important theological question because the what has failed and they're searching for the why. We knew we were the promised people. We knew we were the chosen people because we had the promised land. And now that we've been removed from the promised land, are we still chosen? Are we still precious? The why is coming to the surface. I suspect that they are reading the book of Job with renewed interest in Aurora, Colorado. When what should have been a relaxing, entertaining evening at the theater suddenly erupts with this surge violence and the questions about it. I heard something very troubling, and I'm sure you heard it as well. That many of those who were victims of the shootings in Colorado do not have health insurance. So on top of all of that physical and emotional trauma, on top of years of therapy to recover, it could also be a lifetime of indebtedness. And that's just wrong. And I hope and I pray that we're able to do better by those folks. If you're on the prayer chain here at our church, you've already heard this. But I'd like to share it with you nonetheless. I got an email from Jill Savage, and her family experienced something horrible. Jill writes, "My family needs your prayers. I'm sorry to send you this email, but the bell choir and the empty nesters, they're my New Hampshire family, so you'll understand." And then she tells this story. "I went to Indiana this weekend for what was supposed to be a 3-day visit with my elderly parents. My sister Gina came from Illinois to be with us too. This morning at 9 a.m. we received word that there was a fire in my sister's house in Illinois, and that their 24-year-old daughter, my niece Paula, had died. The fire was started by an ex-boyfriend who later made a full confession and is now in police custody. We have spent the entire day at the police station with victim witness counselors. Tomorrow there's an autopsy and funeral arrangements and insurance stuff to figure out. My sister's house is uninhabitable, and now we are in a hotel in Illinois. My sister's 21-year-old son, Ryan, was not home at the time. He's in college, and he's with us now. Paula's son, 6-year-old Nicholas, was home, but he made it out okay. There's a 25-year-old young man who was also in the home and is now in critical condition in a hospital. His name is Jason. I'm expecting that the funeral for Paula will be later this week. Jeff, Kyle, and Leah all plan to fly out here soon, so please keep us all in your prayers. And pray for Jason. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your support. We all have experiences that challenge the what of our faith, and that call us to ask more deeply. Why? How do we understand, and how can we experience, and how can we know the presence of a gracious and loving God, even in the midst of difficulty and heartbreak? That's the question that Job carries. You know, the same person who described her growing up in a Methodist family that owned a flower shop has done great research on religious life here in the 21st century. And she talks about the first decade of the 21st century as the great spiritual bear market, as a religious recession. And in doing so, she points to a number of things. I remember in my last appointment when I was serving in Northampton, I was thinking about some of these thoughts, and I had my most lonely moment in the pulpit that I've ever experienced. I was preaching away, and I wasn't as prepared as I perhaps should have been, so I was sort of thinking things at the same time I was explaining them, which is seldom a good thing to do. But I remember saying from the pulpit that day vividly, here we sit at the beginning of the 21st century, and what needs redemption most now is the religious enterprise itself. And they all looked up at me with strange and vacant looks. Maybe I said it too quickly and they couldn't follow it. Or maybe I said something that so violated their sense of what? That they didn't quite know what to do, so instead they just asked me what time the supper was. But she tells us that in the first decade of the 21st century, religion has not fared well. In 2001, those who flew the planes into the towers in lower Manhattan claimed to be religious people doing so for religious motives. And we all quickly protest and say, but we're not all alike. But for many, we are all alike. It was the clergy sex abuse scandal and the cover-up by so many bishops. There was great acrimony after the election of Gene Robinson as the first openly gay bishop. I don't know know if this is true or not, but I heard that when Bishop Robinson was consecrated bishop in Durham, New Hampshire, underneath his Episcopal finery was a bulletproof vest, because there were death threats made against him. You see, the religious enterprise is in need of redemption, because out there in the secular mindset, the whole idea is that Christians are dangerous. Religious people will kill you. Religious people will hurt you. Religious people are anti-gay and cruel. Well, as a result of this great religious bear market, this spiritual recession, some research was done. In 1990, 30% of Americans called themselves spiritual, but not religious. 54% of Americans said that they were religious, but not spiritual. 6% said they were both religious and spiritual. And 9% said they were neither spiritual nor religious. So guess what happened 10 years later? Guess how many Americans now say that they are spiritual but not religious? 30. It hasn't changed at all. But what has changed? 9% of Americans now say that they are religious but not spiritual. And 48% now say they are both religious and spiritual. And I notice you chuckle when someone describes themselves as religious but not spiritual. We find that humorous now. But we probably wouldn't have found it humorous 10 years ago. And what this thing, oh, and by the way, just to finish up, 9% say that they are neither spiritual nor religious, which is the same as it was 10 years ago. So what has happened? What has happened to us? How has this great spiritual recession affected us? And I would interpret this data to mean that simply going through the motions of religiosity, being content with the what only, is no longer palatable, is no longer important. That if we want to simply go through the what over and over again, devoid of any investment of our person, of our being, we're doing something that's really quite meaningless. And that what people want most from us is that sense of the why.